Welcome to Commerce Media Matters, your go-to podcast for unpacking the world of commerce media. Here, we catch up with industry leaders on news, research, insights, perspectives, and everything in between.
Hi, I'm Paul, Chief Strategy Officer here at Voodoo.
And I'm Nick Morgan, Founder and CEO of Voodoo. Welcome to Commerce Media Matters, the show where we unpack the latest changes in marketing, media, and commerce. Today's guest is someone who's got a front row seat, Alex Brownsell, Head of Content at WARC Media. If you're in marketing or media, you've probably read something Alex has written, or at the very least, seen the name attached to some of the sharpest insights out there. At WARC, Alex leads the editorial agenda across topics like digital transformation, retail and commerce media, and marketing of effectiveness. His work helps marketers and media leaders make sense of an industry in flux, from new measurement models to the rise of AI and everything in between. In this episode, we dig into the megatrends shaping the landscape, where advertisers are getting it right, where they're falling short, and what the latest research says about the future of content, creativity, and accountability. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So Alex, as Head of Content, you lead the content program for WARC Media and Digital Commerce. Can you share a bit about your role and sort of what topics your focus has been over the past few years?
Yeah, sure. So my role is strange and sprawling. Specifically, I suppose, whenever WARC happens to look at what's happening in media, I tend to be involved. So with WARC Media specifically, WARC has been forecasting data, particularly ad spend for, literally 30, 40 years, and just did the data. And then about 10 years ago, kind of figured, we should build some insights around this. That was done as a bit of a side hustle by the data team. And they kind of decided about 5 years ago, do you know what, we should have a dedicated kind of editorial team around that. So that's the day job. We produce reports on a really regular basis, looking at what we're seeing, key trends in media at a digital platform level, channel level. And then I tend to get sort of brought into different projects. It could be some of our content that we do at Cannes Lion. It could be our annual trends report, the Marketer's Toolkit, and the WARC podcast, of course, as well. So anywhere we look at media, I tend to get kind of pulled in that direction, really. The big change we made in the last few months is around, you mentioned digital commerce. So we used to have a standalone digital commerce subscription product, which reflected the market at the time. What we've seen recently is that actually media and that kind of commerce side of things seem to be converging. So we decided to pull it all together into WARC Media. So anything to do with retail media, social commerce, commerce media is now all kind of within WARC Media. And we're going to be sort of building up a lot more content around that over the next few months. So it's exciting.
Yeah, exciting times. Alex, the WARC's Global Ad Trends report, always gives us a sharp read. It's a standout report. What things are standing out to you? What are the shifts you're seeing, and how are they impacting global ad investment? Because there's big budgets kind of moving around everywhere at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah, they do, definitely. I mean, the thing that we really tried to unpick recently was what is going on with all the tariffs or not tariffs and trade deals and not trade deals. Anyway, so I think our data team produced not one but 3 forecasts last time around to kind of try and gauge where things are going. Interestingly, I think it's sort of what you'd expect, which is that as soon as there's uncertainty, it tends to be the performance-oriented channels that are more resilient to that period of time. Anything involving brand building tends to get, or perceived to involve brand building. Maybe we could touch on that again later. Things like retail media actually seem to be, growth is accelerating. Connected TV is doing really well. But yeah, I think, anything that, not that I would use this kind of term, but the word traditional tends to sort of suffer a little bit. So 24 was a bumper year. 25 we think is going to be a tougher year for the market, but still kind of good overall. So
and retail media keeps on keeping on.
Keeps on keeping on. And also everything changes so quickly. So you kind of got to be on it the whole time, really.
And you think it's because retail media's got that performance commerce outcomes. So when, as you said, in times of uncertainty, and you're poor analyst, by the way, judging what was going to happen with the tariffs, that was a daily change, wasn't it, at one stage? They would have been changing their forecast daily. But yeah, it's those times of uncertainty. And I think that's what commerce media's promise is all about, right? Is being able to deliver that commerce outcome.
Yeah, I think so. By the way, on the data analysts, they love it. Like, give them a massive spreadsheet and a load of coffee and they're as happy as Larry. I think it's the perception that spend is going to deliver an immediate outcome that really is sort of isolating certain parts of the ad market at the moment from the general headwinds that we're seeing, and retail media is certainly part of that because you are so close to the point of purchase. Obviously, I think, we can kind of come on to this. I think one of the things that's interesting about retail media and commerce media is that it's moving up the funnel. It's becoming much more involved in the world of brand now than maybe it used to be, which ultimately may be where the long-term growth is going to come from. But at the moment, that performance ethos seems to be really helping.
Yeah, that's what we're seeing. We've got a very firm opinion on that. Actually, Paul put out some content about that today, didn't you, Paul?
I did. I firmly believe that with commerce media now and some of the technologies that are available to us, you can do brand and drive action. So you can do the long and the short of it. You can get that double duty that some of the marketing professors previously sort of poo-pooed, but they're kind of changing their mind on things and seeing that this sort of technology is available. I mean, you had mentioned your podcast before. You're in regular conversation with all of the industry's most influential voices. What are some of your observations around the key trends that are resonating right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think slightly to plug something that WARC did earlier this year, and we're seeing really has kind of like prodded the hornet's nest, is around that debate around brand and performance. It's something that's bubbled up, and we really feel like it's kind of reached another level in the last 6 months. And one of the reasons why I guess we're maybe involved in that debate a little bit more is we put out a report called The Multiplier Effect in January, February time, which we try to reframe that whole debate around brand or performance and actually look at that both are needed and that both have a complementary impact upon the other type of marketing investment. And it does seem to have kind of stirred that debate a lot. And we are seeing, I think, a lot more now some of the digital platforms that have been much more performance oriented talking up brand. Mm-hmm. And actually, weirdly, then you flip it and the channels that have been much more brand oriented, if that's linear television or other parts of the market, talking about outcomes. And it does feel like we're kind of going through a bit of a time of evolution around what people are perceiving as being brand and performance type investment. So that's definitely a hot topic at the moment. Honestly, anything we ever do relating to attention, measurement, things like that are just constant winners.
Yeah, right.
And really do draw the audience in. Maybe attention, we're kind of coming towards the end of that slight hype cycle. It's been really big for the last few years, and maybe we'll see a little bit of a tailing off. But measurement is, we've just released a big report on measurement and it's done super well. So yeah, that's a hot topic as well.
It always gets people hot under the collar. There's plenty of debate around measurement, always.
I mean, specific to retail media, measurement's an interesting one too, because you have the sort of, I guess, the traditional retailer metrics that they measure on versus the traditional media metrics. And now we're seeing them all converge. I don't know what your view is, but maybe some brands that are using retail media networks are a little bit frustrated that the promise of the data that they thought that they would get combined with their media data isn't there. It's not as easy to get out of the retail media partners that they work with. I don't know if you have a view on that.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a sense that the retail world and I suppose the more traditional brand world don't still fully speak the same language. Partly that's because once upon a time it was totally siloed off, and we all know, retail media budgets, sort of a lot of them historically were sourced from trade and shopper and e-commerce, and now it's kind of coming in, but it's different to the way that they would have engaged with a Meta or a Google historically. So I think that there's a little bit of a sort of adjustment period. And I think you're right, the promise of retail data hasn't necessarily quite realized itself yet. So but I still think we're in the early days of this, and I think a lot of it's to come yet.
It's even the terminology between one retailer and another, though, isn't it, around what they call something being added to the cart, or literally the terminology is not all matching up between different retailers.
Yeah, I know. I think that's completely right. And I think somebody made this point, so I'm not going to claim it was my own, but one of the challenges you've got in terms of trying to make that standardization happen is that for retailers, and Amazon is obviously the big example of this, Walmart, any of these companies, advertising is a small piece of the pie for them. It's a nice, lovely, juicy, lucrative part of the pie, but it's not the whole thing. So for them, the motivation for them to kind of jump through certain hoops to help standardize, and if that's terminology, measurement, whatever it might be, isn't necessarily there in the same way as it would be if you were a social platform or a video platform. I think that's one of the reasons why it's going slower to get to that point at the moment, and why it can just be a bit of a headache for brands if you're trying to deal with 4, 5, 6 different retail media networks who are all talking different languages effectively.
On the flip side, what's one area you think isn't getting enough airtime in the industry? Like a space that we should be really focusing on more, but as an industry, we kind of push it aside, or something that we really think needs to have a bit more of a focus?
So I'm a journalist by background, so I'm going to be biased here. We recently put a report out looking at the sort of difficult relationship between advertising and news content. These things get heightened at times of bad news, and you get blocklisting and that kind of that. But I think it speaks to a broader point around that when a lot of advertisers sort of talk about content, they kind of talk about it as this sort of big amorphous blob, and that actually there isn't any real focus on what premium or quality is. And we're starting to see some research come through on the impact of quality on advertising outcomes from a content standpoint, why it matters to be in premium environments next to premium content as opposed to just
recipe websites.
Yeah. Well, exactly. I mean, it's, the whole landscape's really messy, isn't it? So
yeah,
I think that's just an area that as we move from potentially long-term from a basic CPM that sits across all sort of websites and, we've mentioned attention, there are other quality inputs that you can put in. What does that ultimately take us to? What does that look like? What does that quality CPM become potentially that helps campaigns be more effective? Because that's what we're passionate about. So
I think there's a lot of content that's obviously, been mass produced, and a lot of bad actors with your MFAs and things that really kind of ruining it and spoiling it. You feel like now, Alex, like the pendulum's shifting and it's coming back and going, okay, we really need to focus more and come back to premium content to allow us to our advertisers to have premium experiences and then associate their brands with those experiences, right? And Paul, that's been a big thing for you. You're a big exponent of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, Alex, you're talking about the block lists for news. I mean, at the end of the day, the amount of regulation that's around, having to triple check facts and on what is traditional media that now, does some great digital media as well is they don't compare it to social media channels. So, blocking on keyword is a really dangerous way to look at it, because I think these quality environments, the trusted environments, they do perform better in a lot of the studies that I've seen anyway. So I take your point. I mean, I hear that Group M came out and sort of said, yeah, we actively try to stay away from some news environments because we're using keywords to block as our tool, which means they're missing whole swaths of premium audience in premium trusted content where we know ads perform better.
Yeah, we sort of around the report, we had conversations with people in the industry on this, and one of the things, I can't remember who said it, so I'm claiming somebody else's insight as my own again. But one of the issues is sometimes, by the way, it's concerning if Group M is saying they're doing that, and I think that's quite disappointing. But you often will have senior marketers saying, absolutely, we want to be against quality content, we don't fear news, that kind of thing. But then as you get further down the seniority and you get to junior planners and junior buyers who will take a look at a situation of like, do you know what, is it worth my while it coming back that we happen to be up against some piece of content about a war or the Trump administration, whatever it might be, and that blows back in my face? I'm not going to take that risk. So we actually have risk aversion at the bottom of organizations that doesn't necessarily match the ambition and the rhetoric that we're seeing at the top. And I don't know how you deal with that, but that does potentially seem like one of the issues we got, because I think that the narrative is changing, that the discourse around this is changing, but we're not seeing a change in investment plans.
So this podcast is all about unpacking commerce media and the multiple perspectives on it. It's a big, broad ecosystem in our view. From your vantage point, how would you define commerce media? Can it be defined?
That's a tough one, isn't it?
It is a tough one.
I think everyone feels reasonably comfortable with the idea of what retail media is. It's advertising around retail environments, and commerce media, I guess, as much as I'm able to sort of understand it in my own head, it's inclusive of retail media, but it broadens it to other types of service environments where there's a lot of first-party customer data, and you're able to kind of bring advertising into that experience, into that environment. But I don't know. How am I doing? Is that about what you guys would say?
It's quite articulate.
Something that Paul and I have wrestled with for a couple of years, really. Ever since we spoke about it, maybe the Cannes, that first kind of time we spoke on stage about commerce media, try to define it. And then I think over the last, say, 12, 18 months or 2 years, we've seen really great examples of where we've gone, that's not your traditional retail or retailer engaging in monetizing their real estate. That's a airline, like United Airlines. We're seeing just really...
The banks are involved.
Financial services. Now, we've seen PayPal come out. I think commerce media, it's really about broadening the ability to drive outcomes from leveraging experience, but also first-party data outside of the traditional retailer footprint, and I think it's exciting. It's really exciting. It's something that Paul and I are really passionate about, hence this podcast. So it's always good to get your take.
Yeah, I think it's such an exciting growing part of the industry and evolving all the time. And, as we see different companies and different verticals pop up with their own advertising media businesses, it's going to keep shape shifting. So yeah, it's one we're keeping a close eye on, put it that way.
We've touched on this already, Alex, but let's dig in a bit more. The age-old debate, brand versus performance, as we discussed, we're sitting on this hybrid theory around brand performance and a bit of both. What's your take? Is there a true hybrid model that we think is actually feasible, or is it clear siloing and, the two will never mix because they're fundamentally different? What's your position on this?
I think we're definitely seeing a degree of de-siloing. We've seen more evidence and more research around the fact that all channels produce short and long-term effects to some degree or other, with the exception of generic PPC, seems to just pure play performance outcomes from that particular channel. But otherwise, I think marketers are learning that they can use everything from social to TV to audio to any channel can deliver some short and some long-term outcomes. So I think that is helping a degree of de-siloing, but maybe that is mainly with the sort of big organizations, brand organizations that maybe really buy into the marketing effectiveness debate. Mm-hmm. I think there's probably a majority of advertisers out there for whom these things are still really separate, run by separate teams, which is, I think, why we see really high levels of continued budget allocation to generic paid search, to certain types of social, that the evidence seems to suggest that actually there's probably overinvestment there. If you've got a team who is purely in charge of performance and have a performance budget, they're going to spend it with those channels. So, and obviously we are seeing retail media maybe eat into that and new types of search come onto the market. Yeah, so I'd say there's a bit of de-siloing, but I don't think we're anywhere near to a point where those walls are completely coming down.
WARC's been quite vocal about this in regards to, I think it's about 61%, 62% of budgets are still coming from the retail media. They're still coming from, trade marketing and stuff, but you're starting to see more and more of those budgets, moved away from brand. I know we've talked about that quite a lot. That's something that the brand buckets are really starting to get a bit of pressure in regards to performance, or trying to do a bit of both. Yeah,
well, I think if you're a brand marketer, and by the way, a lot of this comes down to terminology, I think, doesn't it? Brand is a dirty word, I think, in some boardrooms. Or at least it feels like a frivolous word.
Well, it's not tangible to them, right? They can't put a number on it.
Yeah.
The CFO can't hold your account. How's he going to measure it and hold you account to it? And I want to see how many sets of sheets I sold. It is an age-old problem, the struggle, right, with the word brand.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think there's been, people sort of talk, all right, well, why don't we reframe it? It's future demand or something like that. But it's fundamentally, it's a slightly tougher sell. And the advantage if you're in the commerce media world is if you are able to really articulate that you are not just going to drive conversions and outcomes in the short term, but that you're also going to have an impact 6 months, 1 year down the line, then there's a huge opportunity there to start winning some of those inverted commas brand budgets, because those brand marketers, they need to deliver in the short term as well. That could be an opportunity. And we are seeing a lot more debate around, a lot more discussion around full funnel within commerce media, and not just being at the sharp end of the funnel.
I think we were lucky enough to win a WARC award for Path to Purchase with the Moat and Chandon campaign last year. But what was really interesting about that actual campaign is that the brand metrics that we were tracking, the brand favorability scores, we were able to do what some say you can't do, which is that double duty, which is build brand over time, but also deliver the path to purchase and that performance-related outcome of people purchasing directly from the ad. Do you see any of this changing with brand versus performance? I know it's taken a long time for someone to say the words AI, with AI playing a role. I mean, you see OpenAI looking at affiliate-related models. You see Perplexity doing shopping-related models with obviously clip of the ticket sort of revenue styles. Do you see that taking a massive impact on this brand versus performance debate?
I managed to get through 25 minutes without talking about AI. I think that's some sort of prize, right?
I think we should be commended for it, personally.
Look, you're right. Within a year or 18 months, let's face it, there's barely going to be a performance marketing product or service on the market that isn't infused by AI or driven by AI, whatever the linguistic is. We're seeing the big tech guys particularly leaning into this. To just come back to that point we were talking about with quality, I think it's so interesting that we've had this huge emphasis over the last few years on third-party verification, on measurement, on independent verification of what is happening to your campaigns in those walled garden environments. And then AI comes along, and then these lovely black box products come along where they say, just give us the money. It's fine. Trust us. It's okay. We'll put it through and spit out the results, to quote Mark Zuckerberg. It's just interesting that they've been very, very successful whether you're talking about Performance Max, Advantage Plus, or whatever it might be. And I think it's really interesting that marketers are buying into this. They really, really are. Whether that's because it's a time save, it's an efficiency for me, or they're actually seeing better results. I'd start to understand this more in the fullness of time, but there's no doubt that AI as a marketing tool in the B2B world, selling to marketers, has been incredibly powerful already. Far more powerful, I think, more quickly than I think most of us assumed it would be. And that has definitely added wind into the sails of performance marketing. So, we'll have to see if it can do the same for brand marketing as well.
And from the consumer side, I mean, their interactions are now with GPTs and agents increasingly so. The world of advertising is about to be flipped on its head. I mean, traditional ads, they're not really made for that environment. Do you see that having a huge impact as well?
Yeah, I'm sure it will do. I think we just don't know what it's going to look like yet, do we? We're all waiting.
We don't know what it's going to look like because we're not there yet. But what we can watch and witness is where the eyeballs and the activity is moving to, without a shadow of a doubt. And we've been looking at the last 18 months, 2 years, with the increase in prompts and the increase of time spent with the LLMs. There's a big shift. And I think what you're going to see, I still think as a lot of those budgets are going to those traditional channels, I think that we'll start to see a real gulf in regards to the outcomes and the budgets that are still going there. Brands won't have made the shift yet, but they'll say, we're putting our money there and we're getting some kind of activity which is measured, but the outcomes aren't what they used to be, because the eyeballs have moved and the people are somewhere else. And I think it's about who can catch up the fastest to where they're moving. And I also think that the LLMs and the experience, they're going to start driving a different type of behavior out of consumers. They're wanting their attention spans and what they demand is going to change. Paul, you've talked about it like this, where Siri is falling way behind when you've got consumer base expecting a certain behavior from our interactions with brands and things. When we search for stuff, there's going to be this big shift, and it's whether or not brands can actually move fast enough to where the eyeballs and everyone are going, and how that, and then meeting them on those expectations. That's a big opportunity, but we don't know what it looks like. You're right. It's a big monumental shift in advertising, and off the back of the last 6-7 years when we saw a massive space like retail media grow out and just explode, now we have a new one, which I don't think everyone's got a handle on really.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're on the sort of precipice of something fairly major changing over the next kind of 12, 18, 24 months. Obviously, lots of debate online at the moment. Have we kind of gone past peak Google, which is a remarkable thing to think of? And
it's mind-blowing when you think about it. 5, 6, 7 years ago, you would have said, I'll put my money in those shares. Rock solid. Now, what was it since November? 13% searches, up 1,300% increase in searches in LLMs. Paul, I think you told me that stat. They're going up, and they're going up rapidly. It's a shifting landscape right in front of our eyes. Alex, we're aware of the fact that things are moving. Retail media is expanding beyond just e-commerce systems and moving into different channels. We're seeing some really incredible results happening with transactable media inside some social channels. We're fortunate to be aware and be mindful of some of those performance, and we're seeing what's happening with connected TV. There's more commerce outcomes are moving into, like you said before, which was traditionally brand, now moving into those spaces. WARC recently launched their media services to kind of area to talk more about this space and what's happening. Can you unpack some of the other topics that Media WARC likes to discuss in this space?
Yeah, sure. So it's beyond, I guess, really trying to understand what's happening in retail media. I think social commerce is really important part of this, because we know that those big social walled gardens really want in on this, and they've had some false starts, shall we say, in social commerce. We've had some sort of shop type products launch and then be rescinded, and maybe some kind of come back in a different guise. So really trying to get under the skin of what's happening there and how brands are able to kind of intertwine what they're doing from content and a commerce perspective. To the point you made earlier, from a data perspective, that isn't necessarily seamless yet, but we know that that's the direction of travel. Yeah, I think this is a trend that we identified in our Future Media report that came out at the start of the year, which is kind of commerce everywhere. Gaming commerce feels like something that's people have been talking about for a couple of years, but maybe we're really starting to see traction there now. Obviously, CTV environments, you mentioned it just then. CTV is the direction of travel, and I think we're going to see a a tipping point fairly soon in a lot of markets where streaming really kind of accelerates and becomes the primary form of viewing. And that opens huge amounts of opportunities in terms of addressability and, connecting to the wider purchase and commerce environment. So it's what we want to do is we want to sort of really keep an eye on all of those trends and see what's happening there. So we're going to have a quarterly thought leadership report that we're going to look into that. We'll often bring it back, I guess, to what we're seeing in the rest of the WARC world. And as I mentioned before, I think really understanding the role of brand in commerce media and the importance of brand will be something that we'd love to find new evidence. And that's something we're looking into at the moment. And just how channels are kind of mashing up together and creating something new.
I mean, we mentioned our WARC award that we were lucky enough to receive last year. Obviously, in the run into Cannes, you've probably seen a lot of different campaigns. Is there any great case studies out there that are particularly done really well in the commerce media space that you could share with us?
So, yeah, full disclosure, right? We announced the winners of the WARC Awards for effectiveness last week. So I had a chat with my colleague who runs the awards, the inimitable John Bizzell, and he flagged a couple of good ones that I think we really should draw attention to. One of them in particular was Uber Eats, won a Grand Prix in North America for called horror codes. Basically, you get your standard kind of discount codes for grocery orders or takeaway orders, whatever it might be. This was kind of around Halloween, so it was horror themed. You basically had to guess a famous quote from a horror movie that activated 60% off discount. And in and of itself, maybe not that interesting, but I think the way that they broadened that to other channels and made it a really integrated thing through digital out of home, within all parts of the Uber ecosystem, other types of offsite digital as well, I think was kind of interesting. It speaks to one of the challenges, because I think it's really interesting, it's a really creative approach. And I think it speaks to one of the challenges for commerce media is to be more creative. And that's maybe like one of the sort of next kind of the Rubicon to cross for the industry. And I was at an event in London last week where I was listening to a presentation by Colin Lewis, who I'm sure you're familiar with Colin. Yep. And he was kind of talking about his predictions for the year. And his number one was creativity in retail media. It's kind of, it feels like it's time now. Everybody understands the systems, everybody understands the technology, but that creative element needs to come through.
And I think the brands that are using it will be happy about that because, a lot of what I'd heard at conferences from the brands that are using the retail media networks is how do we stand out other than a product listing page? How do we get the creativity that sort of gives them the lady from Bacardi springs to mind. She was talking, how do we get Bacardi's brand to really pop in a creative way within a retail media environment? So I think people will be happy to hear that.
Alex, I just want to come back to something that you said before, because it's something that obviously means a lot to us, but I'd really like to unpack a bit more commerce everywhere. And I'd like to understand, what does commerce everywhere mean to you, but also what does commerce everywhere mean to WARC, and how do they unpack that?
From my perspective, I think the interesting thing here, and we've touched on it a couple of times, is the data. How does the data ultimately work? Because that's the bridgehead. Once you figure out that interoperability, and once the data can flow fully from the retail side into the media side, which, let's face it, has been working with, I was going to choose an Anglo-Saxon word there, but maybe that's not appropriate for the podcast. But anyway, pretty terrible data for the last forever. 60% chance of getting male or female correct kind of thing. It feels like that is going to be a real line in the sand that is crossed once that really high quality data can really infuse your media campaigns. I think that's the moment that everything will change and a lot of the sort of previous practices will move along. If I'm not too philosophical about the situation, I think this is a really, really interesting moment in the history of the advertising industry at the moment that we're seeing. What we're seeing happening at an agency level, for instance, and the absolute upheaval within the holdcos is indicative of the end of one era and the start of something new. And for WARC, we're like any other business. We have to kind of understand where is our place in what's happening and what's coming. And that means, the way that the industry worked before, where WARC was this brilliant resource for media planners and strategists who were generally working within often holdco agencies, sometimes independent agencies, that would be the main thinkers around a campaign. It feels like it's been disrupted. I'm speaking for myself here, by the way, this isn't me as an official WARC spokesperson, but I think that we recognize that there are forces disrupting that way of working. And so for us, it's kind of understanding where do we play going forward. And I think the arrival of commerce and the arrival of retailers in the media world is a massive part of that. And we want to make sure that we're on the right side of that trend and that we're providing the kind of insights and the kind of intelligence that people need in this new world. So it's not to be too hyperbolic about the situation, but it feels like a massive moment. All the stuff that's happening at WPP, all the stuff that's happening with Omnicom and IPG, and obviously we mentioned, Google, 2025 has been a big year for media already.
So true.
What I liked about Commerce Ever and some of the discussions we've been having is, do you think that, you were talking before about CTV looking for commerce outcomes, and we are working with Val Morgan, the cinema guys here, and they're out of home and adding commerce outcomes to those sort of formats as well, all about retail media and the growth in retail media. Is it that now, do you think that commerce media is just media, that commerce everywhere is that now you can transact from any point, and that's just going to become the norm, is that media and content is going to be able to be transactable because of the data, as you said, because we're able to unlock that targeting and that the ability to know when someone's in the market for a certain product and showing intent, and because of the technology that enables people to interact and take action from the media now. Do you think we could just be dropping commerce media and that's just the expectation of media going forward?
I think that's absolutely spot on. I think that's the destination. We're not there yet, obviously, but I think you're right. I think that's ultimately where we get to. That means that previous parts of the media ecosystem are pushed out, as harsh as that sounds, I think. And it's not, it's not a zero-sum game. I think we're going to get there, probably a few years away from it at the moment, but definitely.
Alex, brilliant. Thank you. This has been massively insightful. Now, we are somewhat fun here at Voodoo, so we're going to try and add a bit of something, at the end here. We're going to have a little quick fire here, so some curly questions. So I'm going to come at you quickly, of course. Are you ready?
I'm ready as I'll ever be.
Born ready, as Paul says. Okay. What's the last thing you bought online?
A garden hose.
A garden hose. Gardener, fantastic. Okay. What podcast are you currently listening to?
I am listening to showing myself up here, podcast about medieval history.
What's your go-to online shop? Gardening shop?
Gardening shop. B&Q, DIY.com. There we are.
Do you TikTok? And if you do, you a watcher or a poster?
No, I've been a watcher.
You dancing away there?
No, definitely not. No dancing.
No?
I've been a watcher, but never been a content creator.
Now, we touched on this, and it sounds like you might be in the space, but have you ever bought anything on social media?
No, but my wife does all the time, and our house is full of random Instagram purchases.
That's quite a common response.
Yep. We have a small painting of a dachshund, which is a bit like our sausage dog.
Yeah.
That was not cheap. That was an Instagram purchase.
The point of inspiration. She was inspired, she purchased. Great. Now, this is always a good one for all of us in Adland. What is your most memorable ad campaign?
It's bad, isn't it? Because you end up going back to all the TV ads from when you were growing up.
It's true, though.
Guinness Surfer and...
brand ads.
Yeah, the brand ads. The
John Lewis ads.
Yeah, the football one before one of the soccer tournaments in the early 2000s with the Elvis song and Eric Cantona. The fact that I can't remember which brand was behind it is kind of indicative of...
Yeah. True. Alex, such an awesome session. Really appreciate it, making the time. We've been really excited about this one coming up. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you. It's been brilliant. Really enjoyed it.
And we'll hopefully see you in Cannes.
Definitely. Look forward to a cold glass of rosé.
Sounds perfect.
Enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Commerce Media Matters podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to follow and subscribe. We're always on the pulse of the ever-changing landscape of commerce media, ready to share the newest trends, insightful perspectives, and expert opinions with you. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep making media that matters. This podcast is executively produced and edited by Priya Tahazadeh, with co-producers Sandy Ho, Meg Lirish, and me, Rachel Fang. This podcast is recorded on the lands of the Bidjigal, Gadigal, and Wurundjeri people, and we wish to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of the land.